Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and hope everyone is doing well today. It's a little cloudy here, a little rainy, but we're making it. My channel is discerning what is true. I'm out here basically. I want to know truth. I just want to know it. I don't want to be lied to and manipulated by others. Usually, the majority is never right, folks. In fact, most of the time they are not right. It's only the minority and a very small minority that knows what's really going on. So, what I'm going to be doing today is reading chapter 9 of Amusing Ourselves to Death. And there's a couple more chapters left of this particular book. Again, this book is by Neil Postman. Neil Postman also wrote a book on the disappearance of children. The disappearance of childhood, which would be neat to check that out also, because what's happened simply is children are no longer children, that is, these days, as I've seen a rapid change in children myself. So let's get into the meat of the book and us try to share with you the information that's so valuable. The title is Reach Out and Elect Someone. And then I'm going to say something back to my political science days. We took a course, that is, I took a course in political science locally here at the University of South Carolina. And what we did was simply as we began to look at how politics changed with the process of the television. And what happened was what we call slogans began to take place that really are little bite-sized deals. So, and one I can remember back in the 50s was I like Ike. That's what they said. I like, which was Ike Eisenhower. People were mesmerized by that because simply they just like him. He's just a good old guy, the type of thing. But they don't look at the politics of what he represented or anything of that nature. And many bad things went on during his administrations, that is, too. So the point simply is that we're going to read this and see what happens and what's happened since then. And the political polls, the Gallup polls are important also. That started in the 1920s, and that's all to do with Tavistock. That's also to do with Edward Bernays' books with propaganda. So in The Last Hurrah, Edwin O'Connor, fine novel about lusty party politics in Boston, Mayor Frank Skelton tries to instruct his young nephew in the realities of the political machinery. Politics, he tells him, is the greatest sport in America. In 1966, Ronald Reagan used a different metaphor. Politics, he says, is just like show business. And that's what it is. You see, maybe they are actors, as some have already picked up on, just acting and saying things. And only you see these people when the media comes and they're reporting. What are they doing while there's no television or camera in front of them? You see. Although sports has now become a major branch of show business, it still contains elements that make Skelton's vision of politics somewhat more encouraging than Reagan's. In any sport, the standard of excellence is well known to both the players and spectators, and athletic reputation rises and falls by his or her proximity to that standard. Let me just jump off on the subject with sports. A lot of sports now is actually scripted. It's no longer based upon the best team out there, folks. You got to figure that out because, see, what's happened simply is that pro football has become, as some have already seen, that it's scripted. And certain teams win and certain teams loses. And certain teams, that is players, create what I call turnovers and allow the other team to win. So be aware of that. There are other things going on too, besides that too, with sports. I believe, as some people have already pointed out, that there are people who are not truly men out there on the field playing football or other sports. Think about the tennis star, you see, who recently retired. Does she look like a woman? Think about it. Anyway, so where an athlete stands in relation to it cannot be easily disguised or faked. which means that David Garth can do very little to improve his image of an outfielder with a .218 batting average. It also means that a public opinion poll on the question who is the best women's tennis player in the world is meaningless. The public opinion has nothing to do with it. Martina Navratilova provides the decisive answer. One may also note that spectators at sporting events are usually well aware of the rules of the game and the meaning of each piece of the action. There's no way for a batter who strikes out with the bases loaded to argue the spectators into believing that he has done a useful thing for his team, except perhaps by reminding them that he could have hit into a double play. The difference between hits and strikeouts, touchdowns and fumbles, aces and double faults cannot be blurred, even by the propositions or malapropositions of Howard Cosell. If politics were like a sporting event, there would be several virtues to attach to its name: clarity, honesty, and excellence. But what virtues attached to politics is Ronald Reagan, if Ronald Reagan is right? Show business is not entirely without an idea of excellence, but its main business is to please the crowd. And its principal instrument is artificial. Its politics is like show business. Then the idea is not to pursue excellence, clarity, or honesty, but to appear as if you are, which is another matter altogether. And what the other matter is can be expressed in one word: advertising. In Joe McGillis' book about Richard Nixon's campaign in 1968, The Selling of the President, he said much of what needs to be said about politics and advertising, but in his title and his book, but not quite all. Though the selling of a president is an astonishing and degrading thing, it is only part of a larger point. In America, the fundamental metaphor for political discourse is the television commercial. The television commercial is the most peculiar, pervasive form of communication to issue for from the electric plug. An American who has reached the age of 40 will have seen well over 1 million television commercials in his or her lifetime, and has close to another million to go before the first Social Security check arrives. We may safely assume, therefore, that the television commercial has profoundly influenced American habits of thought. Yeah, it's amazing how this particular tube, the television, is so enamored with people who actually waste many hours of their lives here. And you see, it's a tool, you see, deeply. Certainly, there is no difficult in demonstrating that it has become an important paradigm for the structure of every type of public discourse. My major purpose is to show how it has divested in political discourse, though. But there may be some value in my pointing first to its effect on commerce itself. By bringing together in compact form all the arts of show business, music, drama, imagery, humor, celebrity, the television commercial has mounted the most serious assault on capitalistic ideology since the publication of Das Kapital. To understand why, we must remind ourselves that capitalism, like science and liberal democracy, was an outgrowth of the Enlightenment. Its principal theories, even its most prosperous practitioners, believe capitalism to be based on the idea that both buyer and seller are sufficiently mature, well-informed, and reasonable to engage in transactions of mutual self-interest. If greed was taken to be the fuel of the capitalist engine, then surely rationality was the driver. The theory states in part that competition in the marketplace requires that the buyer not only knows what is good for him, but also what is good. If the seller produces nothing of value as determined by rational marketplace, then he loses out. It is the assumption of rationality among buyers that spurs competitors to become winners and winners to keep on winning. Whereas it assumed that a buyer is unable to make rational decisions, laws are passed to invalidate transactions, as for example, those which prohibit children from making contracts. In America, there even exists in law a requirement that sellers must tell the truth about their products. Or if the buyer has no protection from false claims, rational decision making is seriously impaired. Of course, the practice of capitalism has its contradictions, that is, cartels and monopolies. For example, undermine the theory. But television commercials makes haste of it, you see. To take the simplest example, to be rationally considered, any claim, commercial or otherwise, must be made in language. More precisely, it must take the form of a proposition. That is the universe of discourse for which such words as true and false come. If that universe of discourse is discarded, then the application of empirical tests, that is, logical analysis or any other instruments of reason, are infinite. The move away from the use of propositions in commercial advertising began at the end of the 19th century, but it was not until the 1950s that the television commercial made linguistic discourse obsolete as the basis for product decisions. By substituting image for claims, the pictorial commercial made emotional appeals, not tests of truth, the basis of consumer decisions. You see, that's what he's explaining here simply is that in fact, it's even now, I don't watch much TV, but when I see something, television commercial with cars, it is nothing to do about how good the car is, integrity, or anything of that nature. It's all about what it makes you feel like, you see. And so, sorry. And so, sorry about that. Today on television, commercial propositions are as scarce as unattractive people. The truth or falsity of an advertiser claim is simply not an issue. A McDonald's commercial, for example, is not a series of testable, logical ordered assertions. It is drama and mythology, if you will, or some people selling, buying, and eating hamburgers and being driven to near ecstasy by their good fortune. No claims are made except those who veer projects onto or inferiors from the drama. One can like or dislike a television commercial, of course, but one cannot refute it. Indeed, we may go this far. The television commercial is not at all about the character of the products to be consumed. It's about the character of the consumers of products. You see, images of people, movie stars, and famous athletes, or serene lakes and macho fishing trips, of elegant dinners and romantic interludes, of happy families packing their station wagon for a picnic in the country. These tell nothing about the products being sold, you see, but they tell everything about the fears, the fantasies, and dreams of those who might buy them. What the advertiser needs to know is not what is right about the product, but what is wrong about the buyer. And so the balance of business expenditures shifts from product research to market research. The television commercial has oriented business away from making products of value and towards making consumers feel valuable, which means that the business of business has now become pseudo therapy. The consumer is a patient assured by psychodrama. All of this would come as a great surprise to Adam Smith, just as the transformation of politics would be equally surprising to the redoubtable George Orwell. It is true, as George Steiner has remarked, that Orwell thought of newspeak as originating in part from the verbiage of commercial advertising. But when Orwell wrote in his famous essay, The Politics of the English Language, that politics has become a matter of defending the indefensible. He was assuming that politics would remain a distinct, although corrupted, mode of discourse. His contempt was aimed at those politicians who would use sophisticated versions of the age-old arts of doublethink, propaganda, and deceit. That the defense of the indefensible would be conducted as a form of amusement did not occur to him. He feared the politicians as deceiver, not as an entertainer. I'll say that again. He feared the politicians as being a deceiver, not as an entertainer. The television commercial has been the chief instrument in creating the modern methods of presenting political ideas. It has accomplished this in two ways. The first is by requiring its form to be used in political campaigns. It is not necessary, I take it, to say very much about this method. Everyone has noticed and worried in varying degrees about it, including former New York City Mayor John Lindsay, who has proposed that political commercials be prohibited. Even television commentators have bought into our attention, for example, Bill Moyers in The 32nd President, a documentary on his excellent television series called Walk Through the 20th Century, My own awakening to the power of television commercials as political discourse came as a result of personal experience of a few years back when I played a miscued role in Ramsey Clark Senate campaign against Jacob Javits in New York State, Javits. A great believer in the traditional modes of political discourse, Clark prepared a small library of carefully articulate position papers on a variety of subjects from race relations to nuclear power to Middle East. He filled each page with with historical background, economics, and political facts, and I thought an enlightened sociological perspective. He might as well have drawn cartoons, in fact. Jacob Javits did draw cartoons, you see. In a matter of speaking, if Javits had a careful phrase position on any issue, the fact was largely unknown. He built his campaign on a series of 30-second television commercials in which he used visual imagery in much the same way as McDonald commercials do, to project himself as a man of experience, virtue, and piety. For all I know, Javits believed as strongly in reason as did Ramsey Clark, but he believed more strongly in retaining his seat in the Senate, you see. And he knew full well in what century you are living. He understood that in the world of television and other visual media, political knowledge means having pictures in your head more than having words. You see how it's been skewed. The record would show that the insight did not fail him. He won the election by the largest plurality in New York State's history. And I will not labor the commonplace that any serious candidate for high political office in America requires the services of an image manager to design the kinds of pictures that will lodge in the public collective head. I will want to return to the implications of an image politics, but it is necessary for that to discuss the second method by which the television commercial shapes political discourse. Because the television commercial is the single most voluminous form of public communication in our society. And off the record, folks, if you pay attention to the radio or television, anytime when it comes to election time during the late October or Novembers, you will know it simply is it's bombarded on television stations throughout, also on radio stations throughout, and it's also in the media, that is the print media, by newspaper or by magazines, but mainly that, and even by personal mail that's sent to the voters, because they have the list, folks. They have lists. A lot of times, I know this because I was involved in politics. You would have a list of who the people who were likely Republicans and likely Democrats, and you would mail those things out to the voters, you see, so that you would get these people out to vote. Because the television commercial is the single most voluminous form of public communication in our society, it was inevitable that Americans would accommodate themselves to the philosophy of television commercials. By accommodate, I mean that we accept them as a normal and possible form of discourse. By philosophy, I mean that the television commercial has embedded in it certain assumptions about the nature of communications that run counter to those of other media, especially the printed word. For one thing, the commercial insists on an unprecedented brevity of expression. One may even say instantly, a 60-second commercial is prolix, 30 seconds is longer than most, 15 to 20 seconds is about average. This is a brash and startling structure or communication sense. As I remarked earlier, the commercial always addresses itself to the psychological needs of the viewer. Again, it's the psychological needs of the viewer. It has nothing to do with anything to do with discourse, how they feel about the issues. Very little of that anymore, folks. It's how it makes you feel when you look at him. And so he's integrity and this type of thing. It's just a put on. Indeed, it puts forward a psychological theory of unique axioms. Commercial asks us to believe that all problems are solvable. They are solvable fast, and that they are solvable fast through the interventions of technology, techniques, and chemistry. This, of course, is a preposterous theory about the roots of discontent, and would appear so as to anyone hearing or reading it. But the commercial disdains exposition. From that takes time and invites argument. It is a very bad commercial indeed that engages the viewer in wondering about the validity of the point being made. That is why most commercials use the literal device of the pseudo parable as a means of doing their work. Such parables as the ring around the collar, the lost traveler's checks, and the phone call from son far away not only has a irrefutable emotional power, but like biblical parables are unambiguous didactic. Sorry about that. The television commercial is about products only in the sense that the story of Jonah is about the anatomy of whales, which is to say it isn't, which is to say further, it is about how one ought to live one's life. Moreover, commercials have the advantage of vivid visual symbols through which we may easily learn the lessons being taught. Among these lessons are the short and simple messages are preferable to long and complex ones. That drama is to preferably over exposition. That being sold solutions is better than being confronted with questions about problems, you see. Such beliefs would naturally have implications for our orientation to political discourse. That is to say, we may begin to accept as normal certain assumptions about the political domain that either devise from or are amplified by the television commercial. For example, a person who has seen 1 million television commercials might well believe that all political problems have fast solutions through simple measures, or ought to. Or that complex language is not to be trusted, and that, yes, definitely, yes, that's a good point. And that all problems lend themselves to theatrical expressions. On that argument is in bad taste and leads only to intolerable uncertainty. Such a person may also come to believe that it is not necessary to draw any line between politics and other forms of social life. Just as television commercials will use an athlete, an actor, a musician, a novelist, a scientist, or countess to speak for the virtues of a product in no way within their domain of expertise. Television also frees politicians from the limited field of their own expertise. Political figures may show up anywhere at any time doing anything without being through odd, presumptuous, or any way out of place, which is to say they have become assimilated into a general television culture as celebrities. Being a celebrity is quite different from being well known. Harry Truman was well known, but he was not a celebrity. Whenever the public saw him or heard him, Truman was talking politics. It takes a very rich imagination to envision Harry Truman, or for that matter, his wife, making a guest appearance on the Goldbergs, or I Remember Mama. Politics and politicians have nothing to do with these shows, which people watch for amusement, not to familiarize themselves with political candidates and issues. It is difficult to say exactly when politicians began to put themselves forward intentionally as sources of amusement. In the 1950s, Senator Edward Dirksen, Dirksen, appeared as a guest on What's My Line. When he was running for office, John F. Kennedy allowed the television cameras of Ed Murrow, person to person, to invade his home. He was not running for office. Richard Nixon appeared for a few seconds on Laughed-In, an hour-long comedy show based on the format of a television commercial. But by the 70s, the public has started to become accustomed to the notion that political figures were to be taken as part of the world of show business. In the 1980s, came to Lodge. Vice presidential candidate William Miller did a commercial for American Express. So did the star of Watergate hearing, that is Senator Sam Erwin. Former President Gerald Ford joined with former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger for brief roles on Dynasty. Wow. Massachusetts Governor Mike Dukakis appeared on St. Elsewhere. Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill did a stint on Cheers. Consumer advocate Ralph Nader, George McGovern, and Mayor Edward Koch hosted Saturday Night Live. Koch also played the role of a fight manager in a made-for-television movie starring James Cagney. Mrs. Nancy Reagan appeared on Different Strokes. I do remember that. Would anyone be surprised if Gary Hart turned up on Hill Street Blues or Geraldine Morano played a small role as Queen's housewife in a Francis Coppola film. Although it may go too far to say that the politics as celebrity has by itself made political parties irrelevant, there is certainly a conspicuous correlation between the rise of the former and the decline of the latter. Some readers may remember when voters barely knew who the candidate was, in any case, were not preoccupied with his character or his personal life. As a young man, I balked one November at voting for a Democratic mayor candidate with who it seemed to me was both unintelligent and corrupt. What has that to do with it? My father protests all Democrat candidates are unintelligent and corrupt. Do you want the Republicans to win? He meant to say that intelligent voters favor the party that best represents their economic interests and sociological perspectives. To vote for the best man seemed to him as astonishing and naive irrelevancy. He never doubted that there were good men among Republicans. He merely understood that they did not speak for his class. He shared with an unfailing eye the perspective of Big Tim Sullivan, a leader of the New York Tabernacle Hall in its glory days, as Terence Moran recounts in his essay, Politics 1984. Sullivan was once displeased when brought the news that the vote in his precinct was 6,382 for the Democrat and 2 for the Republican. In evaluating this disappointing result, Sullivan remarked, "Sure, didn't Kelly come to me to say his wife's cousin was running on the Republican line, and didn't I, in the interest of domestic tranquility, give him leave to vote Republican? But what I want to know is who else voted Republican." It's almost like it's unbelievable. I will not argue here the wisdom of this point of view. There may be a case for choosing the best man over party, although I know of none. The point is that television does not reveal who the best man is. In fact, television makes it impossible the determination of who is better than whom. It will mean by better such thing as more capable in negotiations, more imaginary in executive skills, more knowledgeable about international affairs, more understanding in the interrelations of economic systems, and so on. The reason has almost entirely to do with image. But not because politicians are preoccupied with presenting themselves in the best possible light. After all, who is it? It is a rare and deeply disturbing person who does not wish to project a favorable image. But television gives image a bad name. For on television, the politician does not so much offer the audience on an image of himself as offer himself as an image of the audience. And therein lies one of the most powerful influences of the television commercial on political discourse, making you think he's just one of us, you see. To understand how image politics works on television, we may use as an entry point that well-known commercial from which this chapter takes the first half of its title. I refer to Bell Telephone's Romances, created by Steve Horn, in which we are urged to reach out and touch someone. The someone is usually a relative who lives in Denver, or Los Angeles, or Atlanta, in any case, very far from where we are, and who in a good year we will be lucky to see on Thanksgiving Day. It's amazing how they do this, yes. The someone used to play a daily and vital role in our lives. That is to say, used to be a member of the family. Though American culture stands vigorously opposed to the idea of family, there nonetheless still exists a residue nag that everything essentially to our lives is lost when we give it up. Enter Mr. Horn's commercial. There are 30-second homilies concerned to provide a new definition of intimacy in which the telephone wire will take the place of an old-fashioned cold presence. Even further, these commercials implement a new conception of family cohesion for a nation of Kingsmen who have been split asunder by automobiles, jet aircrafts, and other instruments of family suicide. In analyzing these commercials, Jay Rosen makes the following observation. Horn isn't interested in saying anything. He has no message to get across. His goal is not to provide information about Bell, but to somehow bring bring out from the broken ties of millions of American lives a feeling which might focus on the telephone. Horn does not express himself. You do not express yourself. Horn expresses you. Horn expresses you. See. This is a lesson of all great television commercials. They provide a slogan, a symbol or focus that creates for viewers a comprehensive and compelling image of themselves. In a shift from party politics to television politics, the same goal is sought. We are not permitted to know who is best at being president or governor or senator, but whose image is best in touching and soothing the deep reaches of our discontent. We look at the television screen and ask in the same Procrustes way as the Queen in the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all? We are inclined to vote for those whose personality, family life, and style as image on the screen gives back a better answer than the Queen received. As Xenophanes remarks 25 centuries ago, men always make their gods in their own image. I'll say that again. Men always make their gods in their own image. But to this, television politics add a new wrinkle. Those who would be gods refashion themselves in the images the viewers would have them to be. And so, while image politics prefers this idea of self-interest voting, it alters the meaning of self-interest. Big Tim Sullivan and my father voted for the party that represented their interests, but interests means to them something tangible: patriotism, preferably treatment, protection from bureaucracy, support for one union or community, Thanksgiving turkeys for indigent families. Judged by the standards, blacks may be the only sane voters left in America. Most of the rest of us vote our interests, but they are largely symbolic ones, which is to say of a psychological nature, you see. Like television commercials, image politics is a form of therapy, which is why so much of it is charm, good looks, celebrity, and personal disclosure. It is a sobering thought to recall that there are no photographs of Abraham Lincoln smiling, that his wife was in all likelihood a psychopath, and that he was subject to lengthy fits of depression. He would hardly have been well suited for image politics, you see. We do not want our mirrors to be so dark and so far from amusing, you see. What I'm saying is that just as the television commercial empties itself of authentic product information so that it can do its psychological work, image politics empties itself of authentic political substance for the same reason. It follows from this that history can play no significant role in image politics, for history itself is of value only to someone who takes seriously the notion that there are patterns in the past which may provide the present with nourishing traditions. The past is a world, Thomas Carlyle said, and not a void of gray haze. But he wrote this at a time when the book was the principal medium of serious public discourse. A book is all history. Everything about it takes one back in time, from the way it is produced to its linear mode of exposition to the fact that the past tense is a most comfortable form of address. There's no other medium before or since the book promises, that is not promises, but promotes a sense of coherent and usable past. In a conversation of books, history, as Carlyle understood it, is not only a world, but a living world. It is the presence that is shadows. But television is a speed of light medium, you see, a present-centered medium. Its grammar, so to say, permits no access to the past. Everything presented in moving pictures is experienced as happening now, which is why we must be told in language that a videotape we are seeing was made months before. Moreover, like its forefather, the telegraph, television needs to move fragments of information, not to collect and organize them. Carlyle was more prophetic than he could imagine. The literal gray haze that is the background void of all television screens is an apt metaphor of the notion of history the medium puts forth in the age of show business and image politics. Political discourse is empty, not only of ideological content, but of historical content as well. Czesław, I spelled this for you, Czeslaw. I may have butchered that one. Milosz, Miloswz, winner of the 1980 Nobel Prize for Literature, remarked in his acceptance speech in Stockholm that our age is characterized by a refusal to remember. He cited, among other things, the shattering fact that there are now more than 100 books in print that deny that the Holocaust ever took place. Historian Carl Schurz, as in my opinion, circled closer to the truth by noting that the modern mind has grown indifference to history because history has become useless to it. In other words, it is not obscurance or ignorance, but a sense of irrelevance that leads to the dimension of history. Television Bill Moyer inches still closer when he says, I worry that my own business helps to make this an anxious age of agitated amnesians. We Americans seem to know everything about the last 24 hours, but very little of the last 6 centuries of the last 60 years. Terence Moran, I believe, lands on the target in saying that with media whose structure is biased towards furnishing images and fragments, we are deprived of access to a historical perspective. In the absence of continuity and context, he says, bits of information cannot be integrated into an intelligent and consistent whole. We do not refuse to remember, neither do we find it exactly useless to remember. Rather, we are being rendered unfit to remember. For if remembering is to be something more than nostalgia, it requires a contextual basis, a theory, a vision, a metaphor, something within which facts can be organized and patterns discerned. The politics of image and instantaneously news provides no such context, is in fact hampered by attempts to provide any. A mirror records only what you are wearing today. It is silent about yesterday. With television, we vault ourselves into a continuous, incoherent present history. Henry Ford said it's bunk. Henry Ford was a topographical optimist. History, the electric plug, replies, doesn't exist. And those conjectures made sense. Then this Orwell was wrong once again, at least for the Western democracies. He envisioned the demolition of history, but believed that it would be accomplished by the state. That same equivalent of the Ministry of Truth would systematically banish inconvenient facts and destroy the records of the past. Certainly, this is the way of the Soviet Union, our modern-day Oceania. But as Huxley more accurately foretold it, nothing so cruel as all that is required. Seemingly benign technologies devoted to providing the populace with a politics of image, instantly, and therapy may disappear history just as effectively, perhaps more permanently, and without objection. We ought also to look at Huxley, not Orwell, to understand the threat that television and other forms of imagery pose to the foundation of liberal democracy, namely to freedom of information. Orwell was quite reasonable in supposing that the state, through naked suppression, would control the flow of information, particularly by the banning of books. In this prophecy, Orwell has had history strongly on his side. Books have always been subject to censorship in varying degrees wherever they have been an important part of the communication landscape. In ancient China, the Analects of Confucius were ordered destroyed by Emperor Qi Huangdi. Ovid's banishment from Rome by Augustus was in part a result of his having written Ars, A-R-S, Amatoria, A-M-A-T-O-R-I-A. Even in Athens, which sets enduring standards of intellectual excellence, books were viewed with alarm. Areopagita, A-R-E-O-P-A-G-I-T-I-C-A. Milton provides an excellent review of the many examples of book censorship in classical Greek, including the case of Protagoras, whose books were burned because he began one of his discourses with the confession that he did not know whether or not there were gods. That would get you in trouble, I assume, the Greeks. But Milton is careful to observe that in all the cases before his own time, there were only 2 types of books that he puts it. The magistrate cared to take notice of books that were blasphemous and books that were libellous. Milton stressed this point because writing almost 200 years after Gutenberg, he knew that the magistrates of his own era, if unopposed, would disallow books of every conceivable subject matter. Milton knew, in other words, that it was in the printing press that censorship had found its true matter. That, in fact, information and idea did not become a profound cultural problem until the maturing of the age of print. Whatever dangers there may be in a word that is written, such a word is 100 times more dangerous when stamped by a press. The problem posed by typography was recognized early, for example, by Henry VIII, whose Star Chamber was authorized to deal with wayward books. It continued to be recognized by Elizabeth I, the Stuarts, and many other post-Gutenberg monarchs, including Pope Paul IV, in whose reign the first index Librorum Prohibitorio was drawn. The paraphrase David Reisman only slightly. In a world of printing, information is the gunpowder of the mind. Hence comes the censors in their austerity robes to dampen the explosion. So thus Orwell envisioned that government controlled over printed matter posed a serious threat for Western democracy. He was wrong on both counts. He was, of course, right on both counts insofar as we just look at Russia and China and other pre-electronic cultures concerned. Orwell was, in effect, addressing himself to a problem of the age of print. In fact, the same problem addressed by the men who wrote the United States Constitution. The Constitution was composed at a time when most free men had access to their communities through a leaflet, a newspaper, or the spoken word. They were quite well positioned to share their political ideas with each other in forms and contexts over which they had competitive control. Therefore, their greatest worry was the possibility of government tyranny. The Bill of Rights is largely a prescription for preventing government from restricting the flow of information and ideas. But the Founding Fathers did not foresee that tyranny by government might be superseded by another sort of problem altogether, namely the corporate state, which through television now controls the flow of public discourse in America. I raise no strong objection to this fact, at least not here, and have no intentions of launching into a standard brand of complaint against the corporate state. I merely note the fact with apprehension, as did George Gerbert, Dean of Annenberg School of Communication, when he wrote, "Television is the new state religion run by a private minister of culture, that is, the three networks." And that's ABC, CBS, and NBC, but since then there are other networks. Remember, this book is in 1985, 84 and 85. Offering a universal curriculum for all people, financed by a form of hidden taxation without representation. You pay when you wish. You pay when you watch, not when you watch, whether or not you care to watch. Early in the same essay, Gerbert said, "Liberation cannot be accomplished by turning television off. Television is for most people the most attractive thing going in time of day or night. We live in a world in which the vast majority will not turn off. If we don't get the message from the two, we get it through other people." Interesting. That's a great quote. I do not think Professor Gerbner meant to imply in these sentences that there is a conspiracy to take charge of our symbolic world by the men who run the Ministry of Culture. I even suspect he would agree with me that it is the faculty of the Annenberg School of Communication were to take over the three networks. Viewers would hardly notice the difference. I believe he means to say, in any case, I do, that in the age of television, our information environment is completely different from what it was in 1783. That we have less to fear from government restraints than from television glut. That in fact we have no way of protecting ourselves from information disseminated by corporate America, and that therefore the battles for liberty must be fought on different terrains from where they once were. For example, I would venture the opinion that the traditional civil libertarian opposition to the banning of books from schools, libraries, and from such our school curriculum is now largely irrelevant. Such acts of censorship are annoying, of course, and must be opposed, but they are trivial. Even worse, they are distracting in that they divert civil libertarians from confronting these questions that have to do with the claims of new technologies. To put it plainly, a student's freedom to read is not seriously injured by someone banning a book on Long Island or in Anaheim or any place else. But as Gerber suggests, television clearly does impair the student's freedom to read, and it does so with innocent hands, so to speak. Television does not ban books, it simply displaces them. Brilliant quote. Television itself does not ban books, it simply displaces them. The fight against censorship is a 19th century issue, which was largely won in the 20th. What we are confronted with now is the problem posed by the economic and symbolic structure of television. Those who run television do not limit our access to information, but in fact widen it. Our Ministry of Culture is Huxley, that is Huxleyan, not Orwellian. It does everything possible to encourage us to watch continuously. But what we watch is a medium which presents this information in a form that renders it simplistic, non-substantial, non-historical, and non-contextual. That is to say, information packaged as entertainment. In America, we are never denied the opportunity to amuse ourselves. You see, the tyrants of all varieties have always known about the value of providing the masses with amusement as a means of pacifying discontent. It's all psychological. But most of them could not have ever hoped for a sensation in which the masses would ignore that which does not amuse. That is why tyrants have always relied, and still do, on censorship. Censorship, after all, is the tribute tyrants pay to the assumption that a public knows the difference between serious discourse and entertainment and cares. How delighted would be all the kings, the czars, the Führers of the past, and commissars of the present to know that censorship is not a necessity when all political discourse takes the form of a jest. I'll say that last here as we stop this chapter. So Orwell is not someone we should fear, folks. That's what he's saying. He's talking about Huxley here, what they've already done. How delighted would be all the kings, the czars, and the Führers of the past, and commissars of the present, to know that censorship is not a necessity when all political discourses takes the form of a jest. So I appreciate you being here. We'll look into chapter 10. Maybe a little later today, we'll do that chapter. So this is a important book, even though it is 25, it's 35 years, over 35 years old. Naturally, he says the three networks, which tells me that simply was that the WB and Fox News were not even around. So the next chapter we'll be dealing with, we'll be teaching as a amusing activity. Interesting chapter here, folks, so we'll get to that. I appreciate you being here. If you find it important and find that something of this nature needs to be shared, share it with other friends and family, because we're not fighting a war here. We are psychologically becoming dumber down, and we're not even seeing the real issues anymore. And we're being pacified as children. He states that very much so. I do know that Neil Postman's son has actually updated this book, I think a few years ago. It's still the same title, but I think he's updated the book, from what I understand, or they've actually maybe just reprinted the same matter. I don't know, but it's interesting that his son thought very much of his father to actually share this with others. So I wish you a good day, and I hope you are doing well. And like he said, something interesting is now we are bombarded by information, and we've been in information age basically, when I understand it, basically since the 60s. But he hasn't dealt with something else, which I don't know if he deals with or not, because I haven't yet finished the whole book. But I wonder if the computer is also a tool that's used. Can it be used for positive? Yes, in some ways it can be. It also can be used for negative too. And that's why many people spend time on it, not only at work, but also in play. So you have a good day. You take care. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.